Hey gang, we are on the beautiful Isle of Hoy. We are in the Orkney Islands in Scotland. We're going to walk to a really interesting grave here. Dates back to the 1700s. It's located right up there. Let's go back to the 1700s, the 1770s. It was here on this island, the Isle of Hoy, where a baby was born, and she would grow up to be a bonny lass. Her name? Betty Corrigal. When Betty was 27 years old, there was a ship passing through, and the young sailor, and they met, and they fell in love. He would decide to stay with Betty. And then Betty found out that she was with child. She was so happy. She was rejoicing. But when she told the sailor, her lover, he just bowed his head and walked away. Betty was devastated. She didn't know what to do. But worse was to come. The next day she found out that the young sailor had left. He abandoned her. A whaling ship was leaving, and he was on it. Well, being single and with child in those days was not acceptable. The villagers here, they had strong religious beliefs, and so Betty was condemned. She was shunned. She had nowhere to turn. Finally, she decided it would be best to take her own life and that of the bairn. It was a foggy, calm morning when Betty stepped onto the beach, walking among the rocks, and she made the fateful decision to walk out into the cold, icy water. And as she waded out, she was going to drown herself. But one of the villagers was watching, and he came running down, yelling. Into the water he went. Betty was already neck deep, going down. Other villagers came, and they all bravely went in, and they brought her back. They saved her. But alas, it was not to be. Betty was committed, and the next day, a very, very sad sight in her parents' cowshed. There, before the eyes of her sad parents, Betty had hanged herself from the rafters. Unfortunately, the lairds of Hoy did not want the responsibility of this type of death. She could not be buried with everyone else. This would not be right. She could not be in hallowed ground, consecrated ground. Therefore, it was decided that Betty would be buried in grounds far beyond the parish borders. And it is here, near this small lake, on the boundary of what was called Hoy and North Walls, by the waters o' Hoy. This is where she would be buried, in an unmarked grave. And it is here that Betty would sleep undisturbed and forgotten for nearly 160 years. But then, by chance, in 1933, two of the local men, a family called Rob, were working a piece of land that was part of a common pasture, but had since been enclosed and cultivated for farming. Well, they were cutting the peat, and as their shovel dug in, all of a sudden they hit solid wood. Yes, it was the boards of an old coffin. Of course, it was Betty's coffin. Ah, they were delighted. Was this a treasure to be found? Was this a tomb? Gold? Silver? Ah, they called the local postmaster over. His name was Isaac Moore, and it is he who opened the coffin. And what they saw shocked them all. No gold, no silver, but there was a different kind of treasure. There, laying before them, was the perfectly preserved body of Betty. She was uncorrupted. Her beautiful long black hair lay draped over her shoulders. Every part of her face was unblemished. Her eyelids closed with long lashes, her small nose. Her lips, they still even looked supple. She had been preserved perfectly over all that time by the peat. Well, after gaping over this discovery, they came to their senses, and they respectfully closed her coffin as it was. They carefully put the peat back upon Betty's unmarked grave, and there she would lay undisturbed. That is, until the outbreak of World War II. Here on the island nearby Lyonesse became a major naval base. Thousands of British troops were guarding Scapa Flow. Of course, this was the home port of the British fleet. Soldiers digging in the peat to erect these telephone poles, they came across her coffin. And of course, they immediately opened it. The men were mesmerized with Betty. The word spread around and more men came. They called her the Lady of Hoy. But they respectfully reburied her. But the story kept spreading, and other soldiers kept coming over. They wanted to see the beauty, the Lady of Hoy. So her coffin was repeatedly dug up and covered up. Now she was the local celebrity of all of Orkney. Unfortunately, with all the disruption and air getting to the corpse, it started to deteriorate. And as the word continued to spread, now some of the officers learned of the discovery, and thankfully they stepped in. They exhumed the coffin very carefully and moved it 50 yards away to this place where we stand now, and they covered Betty with a concrete slab under the peat. In 1949, a visiting American, a Reverend Kenwood, gave Betty Corrigal a proper service. He also secured a promise from the local customs and excise officer, a man named Harry Berry, to erect a headstone. Well, it didn't happen right away. It didn't happen for a long while. But finally, in 1976, this headstone was finally constructed. But no, it's not made of stone. That would not work. Even with a foundation, it would slowly sink and fall over. So they made it of lightweight fiberglass. And here it stands today. The simple white headstone reading, "Here lies Betty Corrigal." I travel a lot of miles to see Betty. I hope you enjoy this episode. On this windswept island, it is really windy here, but beautiful. All right, from Hoy, the Isle of Hoy, on the Orkney Islands, Scotland. I'll see you on the next one. Rest in peace, Betty Corrigal. Rest in peace.